It's the par four on Pittsburgh Golf Now. Matt Gajtka with Zach Weiss, bringing you four topics from the world of golf, and you knew we had to come back at it immediately after the U.S. Open. What could be considered a historic triumph for one Mr. Bryson DeChambeau. Call him an iconoclast, call him an innovator, call him a disruptor, call him a jerk. I think I've called him all four of those things this year, but what you can definitely call him is U.S. Open champion for the 120th playing of our national championship. Bryson DeChambeau, the only player under par, and not only that, Mr. Weiss, but sixth clear of the field. Only Matthew Wolff was even able to manage an even par 72 holes. I think a lot of us thought Winged Foot typically yields an above par winner, if not a well above par winner. But this time around, I'm not sure I saw this type of dominance from DeChambeau, but I don't know if we should necessarily be surprised because in a lot of ways, this sort of thing was percolating, and, we saw it all boil over the weekend in greater New York.
Well, sure. And I think when you look at major championships, I think that a lot of people looked at Bryson DeChambeau most recently at the PGA Championship as one of those favorites, but he didn't necessarily come into form. And I believe his best major championship finish before this week was actually at Oakmont Country Club in 2016. I believe that was a tie 16th. And now 16 proves to be a lucky number again. It was his 16th major championship, and he might have hit maybe 16 fairways the whole week. I think it was closer to the mid-20s. But it goes to show you that if you miss it in the right spot, maybe the rough wasn't necessarily as penal. With a Sunday, the last only bad break he really got off the tee was on 14, where he kind of short-sided himself. And even then, he was able to get out and minimize harm. So really what DeChambeau did is I think he did his best Danny Lee impression, which was he finished his round and avoided too much heartache. He avoided the tough start. He overcame the tough start, rather, and he finished on the stronger side. Then he knew that his driver was going to be key. And even though the first hole wasn't a birdie, what he's able to do is he was able to get the ball square in the middle of fairway. He took advantage of the length. He hit the green, which U.S. Open is completely fairways and greens for the most part when it comes to their courses, especially with the USGA as the masterminds, although maybe not as much this week. And then even though he didn't make the putt, I think it was clear that his putter, the speed was on tack. He hit the fairway, he hit the green, and it boded well. And really from there, he hit his first 2 or 3 fairways and was off to the races. I mean, Matthew Wolff hasn't necessarily experienced a stage like this before. Maybe it's a reminder of earlier in the year when he slept on a lead very similar to this, and unfortunately for him was not able to close the deal in either instance. But for DeChambeau, it's back to the drawing board again, because now he wants to work with an even bigger driver head. He wants to gain another 15 pounds, and Proclaimers will walk 500 miles, and Bryson DeChambeau will gain 15 more pounds. So I guess all the power to him in the world. But hey, congratulations, however you want to slice it. He could be whatever. I mean, even President Bush might have called him the decider. But the one thing that was certainly decisive was the fact that Bryson DeChambeau was your 2020 U.S. Open championship, your 120th champion in 2020 there. So it was good overall for DeChambeau, lots of positives to take out of the week. And for him not even to really release the Kraken too much and to still be a major championship shows that all these changes that he's made are really, really for the better for his game, even if others might not feel that way. Money talks, winning talks, and Bryson DeChambeau has walked the walk and talked the talk on the biggest stage now.
Well, yeah, he's certainly done both of those things. And now we can dig into the four topics. We will talk about, no doubt, the setup and whether there's a room or even whether it's time for the USGA to take a different tack with putting some of these courses in position to humble the best players in the world. Also, I want to talk about the Champions Tour, believe it or not, as we had another notable winner out west at Pebble Beach. But first and foremost, it's Bryson, and you've already touched upon some of the positives there, Zach. For me, I think it's more of an individual basis as far as what you take away from this one, because there are so many folks out there who, by matter of taste, don't like the kind of golf that Bryson DeChambeau is playing, where you bash it long, and you go find it, and you chop it onto the green, and you make a putt maybe, and you get your birdie that way, as opposed to that absolute precise way of playing golf that a lot of U.S. Open champions have executed in the past. But for me, I think it's a misnomer, and I think Bryson, if there's one big positive that he can bestow upon us, the golf world, the golf followers here, is to enlighten us on what really wins. And at least in the U.S. Open, particularly, it's all-around play. The guy's gotten a lot better at putting. He's always been a pretty good chipper, but he gained, I think, 5 or 6 strokes on the field around the greens this week, in addition to 3 or 4 off the tee. So it's not just about off the tee, even though obviously his gains and his distance gains, more specifically, are going to garner those headlines, and they have, and they will continue to do so for good reason, because the guy telegraphed his transformation and he pulled it off, and less than a year later, he's a first-time major champion. But for me, I feel like it's just a celebration of all-around golf because, honestly, Zach, Power's always won. For going back to Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus, even Bobby Jones, Ben Hogan was one of the longer hitters of his day. Let's not act like Power hasn't always been important. I feel like people are overreacting to this in a lot of ways. But number two, maybe a corollary to that, is just he was great in the rough. He was great off the fairway. He was excellent around the greens, like I was saying. It's not just about getting longer. It's about refining your whole game. And through his scientific approach, I respond to it. It's an objective-minded approach. It's an analytical approach. I feel like it's just a celebration of that side of the game and that way of thinking, and how it can help all of us get better at whatever we're trying to get better at.
I think what you saw was a case of the USGA thinking that it was playing chess, but it was the scientist who was playing chess the entire time while the USGA was really playing checkers. It was a completely different course, and really the one thing you didn't mention from tee to green was DeChambeau's iron play. And perhaps, like we mentioned earlier on the course of the Bob O'Connor golf course at Shenley Park, we mentioned that iron play was largely what was holding him back from being a consistent contender. And really, the times that he did have the iron play, he was a little bit inconsistent. It was something he mentioned in between protein shake and chocolate milk on Sunday night. But beyond that, the biggest change, I think, goes back Saturday night when he knew that he was on the right track again, and he decided to go back to that range, and he decided to go to that driver because he felt that if he had that driver, the rest would become second nature. And ever the perfectionist, while Matt Wolff is playing horse with his caddy on the driving range, DeChambeau decides to switch his driver. And that was a huge equipment change that actually happened in the final round and perhaps gave him that confidence. One final tweak for DeChambeau to maybe buck the trend one more time of what the USGA was trying to do, because he not only was the only golfer under par overall, but he was the only guy that just shot under par, period, on the last day. Another case of DeChambeau saving his very best round when other guys were either out of it or fried till the very end. And it goes back to something Brooks Koepka even said last year about contending, where he said this many guys are already out of it at a given point, so I don't have to worry about it. With the U.S. Open, I would say, except for maybe a half dozen to maybe a dozen other guys, DeChambeau didn't really have to worry about anybody else in the field. And really, it was only primarily a two-horse race between him and Matthew Wolff with how things were going with the course and with how the trends were going with what the course was giving out to begin with. So when you look at that, DeChambeau doesn't really have to worry about scoreboard watching. He can focus that time and energy on the course and taming the course to the best of his abilities, focusing on those putts, which he was able to do, focusing on missing on the right side, not short-siding himself, which save for one fairway he was able to do. So really, when you look at things, although it was very complicated and there were putts where he wasn't even really facing the flagstick, he was more facing the angle and letting his putter and the golf ball do the rest of the talking. Really, he was the smartest one on the golf course the entire week because he made sure the mistakes weren't too costly. While other guys were making big squares all across the ponds, DeChambeau really didn't make the major mistakes. And even when he did, he was able to get out of jail because he missed on the right side, or he had the shot, or he had scientifically figured out whatever that secret was for his shot in between 150 yards and out. So really, what Bryson DeChambeau did was he didn't panic. He kept things in perspective, and regardless of all the idiosyncrasies, regardless of what it is, that's what it is. So DeChambeau, what he needs to work on is going to be the iron play. But now what this is it sends a message not just to his doubters, but to the people that are very intrigued by what he's doing that shows, hey, it's working. He's keeping healthy. He's gaining his weight, but he's not injuring anything. The Mo Norman comparisons are working for him. It's a very similar swing on a similar plane, just like what Mo Norman had. Something else I mentioned in an earlier one of these par fours. But DeChambeau's game's not only in the right direction, but he's finding a little bit more consistency. And how convenient that he's the favorite for the Masters, which is, go figure, the next two majors on the calendar. So another rare form of COVID maybe bringing some familiarity back to things. So good on DeChambeau. It's good for the game that there's some differences that are going on. I mean, are the outbursts there sometimes? Yes. Is he a little bit bizarre? Yes. But at the end of the day, it works for him. And again, money talks and science talks. And DeChambeau was able to get a victory for science, get a victory to prove some more doubters wrong, and ultimately, I think it's going to grow the game.
I was so impressed by that final round, too. I don't want to gloss over that. The 67, the only under par round on Sunday as the greens got faster and more firm. The winds picked up a little bit more, a little bit cooler in that September low sun in greater New York. So the best final round for a winner since Johnny Miller, 1973 at Oakmont, in terms of number of strokes below the average round. I think DeChambeau was somewhere around 8 or 9 strokes better than the field average there. Miller was 10 strokes better than the field average when he shot his famous 63 to win right here in Pittsburgh. All right, Zach, negatives for this win, perhaps. I'm actually not going to go in the direction that a lot of people are, wringing their hands over the fact that this game could get out of control in terms of power. For me, Bryson is a special case here, a guy who has the work ethic, has the time and opportunity as a young single man, has the dedication, has the mind for it. It's a perfect storm in a lot of ways. I don't expect many guys to try to replicate this, at least not the current ones on tour. Maybe the next generation, as he alluded to, and several commentators did, they will take this and try to emulate it. But it takes a lot. It takes a lot of focus to get that done. And even so, I don't feel like that's going to necessarily change the game that much. It's already been a power-oriented game for 10, 15, 20, even go back 30 years to the onset of the John Daly mania in the early 90s. What I am concerned about, though, Zach, is course designers thinking that the only answer here is longer rough and longer courses, which in effect makes it tougher for all of us. The recreational player leads to slower rounds, but also on the PGA Tour and these guys in the major championships too, we saw this week when no one's hitting fairways, it still benefits the longer hitters. So I think I would love to see more creativity, more nuance, maybe even just like the old Augusta approach where everything's shaved down and it's all fairway, or the links approach where it's so hard and fast that maybe shots that would be good other places that would stop in the fairway, run through and go into trouble. Perhaps that's the answer. But I know what the answer isn't, and that's 8,000 yards and fairways that are 5 yards wide. So I hope that course designers and the USGA and other governing bodies in the future don't look at this like they did with Tiger Woods. I think there was a mistake made, especially at Augusta, to change that course and to make it into something different that took away from some of its uniqueness and made it very direct and not very creative. So that's my big concern. There's going to be some sort of overreaction here that's going to hurt the greater golfing public. Do you see any positive or possible, I should say, negatives to this win for Bryson?
Well, I think just looking at, since we discussed the winner, I think we should talk about losers and make it plural. And I think the USGA has to take the index finger and take the thumb, make it in the shape of an L, and put it right up here. I think they were anticipating that they had made this impossible behemoth. I think a little bit of an overreaction, like I mentioned last week, to last year, and pretty much somebody fell off the page pretty much every day. I mean, you looked at the first day, Justin Thomas and Patrick Reed really flew off the page. The second day, maybe not too many outliers in terms of the top of the leaderboard. Probably thought that Alex Noren was going to be a top 10 early on after the third round, but then you had a couple guys really jump off the page, namely Matthew Wolff, and of course, DeChambeau solidified his standing at the end. I think the USGA, long story short, tried to make this test impossible. I think they saw the first day didn't go the way they planned by making some of these hole locations a little bit more accessible than maybe they even thought. And I think rounds 2, 3, and 4, they were expecting to be a counter and an overreaction. And for the most part, they failed in that respect. And now that leads the USGA into a really, really tough crossroads because they haven't really had to tailor a course for anybody. They just made it difficult for everybody since the mid-2000s when they tried to tiger-proof everything. And you saw really how well that worked. He won on one freaking leg. So, I mean, that really didn't necessarily work too well. But I share your concern because if you extend the course to those lengths, then you're going to have the same 12 guys that are going to be able to have a chance every week. You have these other guys that are just going to get free cushy suites and hotels and luxury suites and consolation trophies. So really that doesn't do the game any good, and it doesn't do the pros any good because they're essentially blowing their brains out for whatever. I mean, you look at another loser that I would mention, which would be Jordan Spieth, and just how he's fallen off the face of the earth. And really his chances were over before it even started. He was in the group right before Tiger Woods and Justin Thomas and Colin Morikawa. He was literally backing up to them, having to hit another shot and trying to make light of it. And here he is, and everybody's saying, oh, he needs a new caddy, he needs a new swing coach, he needs a new everything. His mind's set up. So if you take somebody like that, who has, I'd say, about average to below average in terms of off the tee distance, and then if you take someone like that and extend that course X amount of yards, I mean, these guys are already going on the driving range going, well, what am I even wasting my time for? I don't have a chance to win this week. So it becomes a point where it's just not fair, and you kind of have to control the course for what it is. It's just you set up the course, and you can't really plan for a guy that releases the Kraken on 75, 80% of the holes, whether it's off the tee or whether it's with how he's able to shape his irons and his mid-game. But really what they did was they tried to do the best they could, and for the most part it worked. They just had some good rounds that came off the play, and sometimes you just have to chalk that up. So I mean, that was a loser. Obviously, not having Tiger and Phil from a name perspective was a loser, it was a stinker, but Mickelson's even said his game's not up to par, no pun intended, and Tiger Woods just hasn't had the good season, just too much start and stop, not enough starts. The body does what it does and sometimes has a mind of its own, and the body's undefeated. I mean, no one knows that better perhaps in golf than Tiger Woods. So, I mean, it was unfortunate in that respect. I mean, you even had guys like Patrick Reed, who Reed and DeChambeau are pairing, and everybody's all excited because it's polarizing and you kind of don't want to see the quote-unquote bad guy win, and you have two of the so-called polarizing bad guys win, potentially. I mean, of course, Patrick Reed fell off the page, but you look at one more loser, and really that's people that are on the fence. And what I mean by that is you have guys that really aren't big DeChambeau fans, and now they're kind of forced into a corner because now he's finally won that major. He's won big tournaments before. He's won the Memorial. He's won several others. He's won the Shriners. He's now won 7 events, I believe, including this major. So when you have a guy like Phil Mickelson who says, oh, I've learned so much from Bryson, and then you have a guy like Rory McIlroy who's essentially doing his best impression, which is pretty much what he did. He kind of went halfway. You can't really go halfway anymore. I mean, like the guy or not, his approach is working, and McIlroy's a very candid guy, sometimes to his own detriment, and this was a big miss for him, for a guy who's kind of been on that page. I mean, recent FedEx Cup champions, almost got a career slam, if not for the Masters. World number ones, won many prolific tournaments, and here's a guy that the press knows they can get a good quote from him. Basically, he says, well, I don't know what to say, turn the recorder off. So it really makes it difficult when the guy that's maybe the most willing to talk doesn't really is giving you something without really giving you anything. So at this point, you kind of have to look at Bryce and say, hey, maybe I don't like the game, but he's bringing a new level of golf or a new attractability to golf that wasn't there before. I mean, we'll have to see if it's something similar to a Tiger Phil where it moves the needle that much where the casual fan's interested to see, hey, is this guy going to blow up, or is this guy going to do a John Daly and hit it 400 yards? Is he going to emote and pump his fists to the heavens, or is he going to try to get Tim Tucker, his caddy, to block out the camera? Because Bryson DeChambeau's appointment viewing in that sense, he's frustrating to watch because he takes so long, but he has so many thoughts that are going through his mind that he has before a shot too that it's entertaining. So yes, the USGA will probably look at itself and say, we've got to fine-tune some things for Torrey Pines. We might have some egg on our face, but between golfers on down, there's some other losers big time this week as well that you definitely don't want to make light of either.
We talked about Bryson, obviously. We talked about some of the losers, even though they were challenging in some cases. In case of Matthew Wolff, of course, Harris English, also a pretty good story. Yeah, for me, Rory, DJ, John Rahm, I was looking forward to at least one of them making a push, and it just didn't happen. Didn't mind seeing Patrick Reed shoot that 43 on the back nine on Saturday, though, I have to confess. He's very easy to root against. As some of you might root against Bryson, I root against Patrick Reed in that way. And we also talked about the USGA. So we can move on to, for our final topic here on the Par 4, to the Champions Tour. And Jim Furyk, Pennsylvania's own, Steeler fan, so I'm sure he's feeling okay about the 2-0 start, but I'm thinking he's feeling pretty good about his own personal 2-0 start on the Champions Tour as he won the Pure Insurance Championship on Sunday at Pebble Beach Golf Links. Playoff win over Jerry Kelly. Also, Ernie Els breathing down his neck. Ernie missed a short par putt to try to get into that playoff, actually. But some star power on the Champions Tour right now with some guys turning 50 like Ernie, like Jim Furyk, like Phil Mickelson, who won in his debut a couple of weeks back in the Ozarks. Zach, you see Jim Furyk becoming just the third player ever to win his first 2 starts on the Senior/Champions Tour, joining Arnold Palmer, of course, Jim's own role model from his native state, and also Bruce Fleischer. So the question I have for you is, and I'll give you my opinion first, is the Champions Tour maybe not good as an immediate step for some of these 50-year-olds who, it looks like in golf, 50 is not what it used to be. It used to be there was a bit of a break there because guys couldn't compete on the PGA Tour by and large in their 40s, especially in their late 40s. We just saw Stu Cink win at the Safeway in Napa Valley on the PGA Tour, in fact. Not a limited field, but not a full-strength field event. But still, you're seeing winners like him, and now you're seeing guys like Jim Furyk and Phil Mickelson who are still competing on the PGA Tour. Furyk, in fact, led the PGA Tour in driving accuracy last year, so he's not exactly easing into a semi-retirement here. Is there almost a need for an intermediate step? Because this feels, I don't want to say unfair, because the 50-year-olds have always had the edge on the Champions Tour. But at the same time, if guys come in and can win right away, and Phil, not even playing at his best, but blowing away the field in that example, I'm not sure if that's necessarily in the spirit of the Champions Tour. So I don't know what you do to change that, but maybe you limit some of the starts for the guys who are fresh off the PGA, or at least still competing on the PGA Tour, like Furyk and like Mickelson are on a part-time basis.
I have so many different directions my head's taking me. It's probably very similar to Bryson DeChambeau's mindset at this point.
Just don't take 3 minutes to answer. That's all I ask.
I very well may. And you know what? That's okay, because you can always cut whatever you don't want to use. That's the beauty of Zoom. But regardless of that, there's so many schools of thought, and I'll start with the fact that you have guys that are maybe 40, 45. You don't have guys like Kenny Perry all the time that are able to win 3, 4 tour events in their 40s and still be able to compete. Maybe even a KJ Choi was relevant in his early 40s as well. You just don't have that often. But so then you have guys that are like Paul McGinley said, look, I'm 40 something. I can't really compete. I'm just going to put all my eggs in one basket and wait until I turn 50. I can succeed as a commentator if I need to. He obviously had the history winning the Ryder Cup as well, and pretty much making all the right decisions, although in that time doing that against the Americans, especially the captain he was paired against, Tom Watson, that wasn't probably the hardest thing to do. So you have guys like that in those cases. The other thing that I think really helps is when you're a PGA Tour pro, they intentionally try to make these pin locations the most difficult that they can. So you're maybe hitting it up against a slope, against bent up greens with divots all around you. Whereas the Champions Tour, you're looking at practice round pin locations, essentially. These pin placements aren't necessarily the hardest thing to deal with. So they're either in the middle of a green, they're in a spot where you can be aggressive and take chances. And when you're a guy like Phil Mickelson, or you're a guy that's as accurate as Jim Furyk, those potentials are much more there. So then you look at something like that and you cope it with, you don't necessarily have to be informed to play here. If you can hit a fairway or get semi-close, the rough isn't nearly going to be that penal. You can't really hit it out of bounds. There's not too much trouble, and these courses aren't traditionally troublesome. I mean, even in the case of this past week, all these pros have played Pebble Beach. All of these pros, with the exception of a few, have played Firestone Country Club. So they know these courses, and they expect to come to these courses year in and year out, just like they did with the PGA Championship. But the stress is not really there. The galleries generally aren't that big. As far as your point goes with limiting the starts, when you have bigger names like Phil Mickelson, when you have names like a Fred Couples, they kind of already do that themselves. I mean, let's not forget that had Phil not missed the cut, Phil would not have played and won that event that week. He just thought he wasn't in good form and he needed to get some confidence. Now, it doesn't seem like that confidence really resonated because it's Champions Tour, and he said it himself. The pins were very, very gettable, so it was easy to shoot a low score. Essentially, the pressure was off, and especially in COVID with no fans, it's not really that hard to make an adjustment like that. So when you add that factor in, I mean, will Furyk maybe split time a little bit more? Sure, especially with more responsibilities coming from the Ryder Cup perspective. I'm sure he'll split more time just because he's a part of these teams on a consistent basis with decision makings, whether he's an assistant, a captain, a vice captain, whatever the case may be. Furyk always has had his thumbprint on that. But then you have a guy like Ernie Els you mentioned who lost in a playoff to Miguel Angel Jimenez. Fred Couples was in that playoff too. Then he won. Then he pulled the putt yesterday. So he's been in contention too, but he hasn't necessarily had to be as selective because his game in terms of PGA Tour is just not necessarily there right now, which, I mean, guys in their 50s, it's hard to do, and it almost makes you respect even more at 60 years old. You mentioned these 50-year-olds that are able to come in and win, that Bernhard Langer is still as competitive as he is well into his 60s, where you have guys even like a Gary Player. I mean, Tom Kite was out there this past weekend still giving it a go. Every once in a while, Tom Watson's willing to give it a go. At this point, it has to be the right opportunity. But you have guys that still are willing to compete. David Frost is in his 60s now. He was a major champion as well. Kenny Perry's still competing. He's pretty much done with his one-time exemptions with the PGA Tour, so he's essentially Champions Tour as well now. So I guess to answer your question, there's a lot of layers. I mean, do you limit the starts of these guys? No, because when you bring these fans in, who are they going to want to see? Are they going to want to see Dudley Hart, or are they going to want to see Phil Mickelson? That's no offense to Dudley Hart. That's just the first name that came off the top of my head that was kind of that journeyman. Do you want to see Joey Sindelar, or do you want to see Ernie Els? I want to see Ernie Els. Joey Sindelar, nice guy, but Ernie Els pushes the needle a lot more. South African multi-major champion, gave Phil the ride of a lifetime in 2004 at the Masters. I mean, the stories write themselves. I mean, would you rather see Freddie Cup? I mean, the list goes on. That's just what it is. These names for the PGA Tour champions, when the purses aren't as big, the sponsorships aren't as big, and you have to put butts in seats or standing in grandstand areas, you have to do what you have to do. And I get that their hands are tied, but these pros also want to make a decision for their own bottom dollar. I mean, how many times has Steve Stricker had to make a decision between PGA Tour and PGA Tour champions? He went PGA Tour champions last year at Firestone because he thought he had a better chance to win. So he skipped the Illinois stop he always did with the John Deere because he thought he had a better chance to win. Did he win? No, but he finished right there, and I think he medaled. He got third or fourth or something like that. So it certainly was justifiable for him doing it. Long story short, the Champions Tour, it's really easy to pick up and play. You're pretty much playing with all of your friends, regardless of who's out there, and everybody knows everybody. So there's not really that awkwardness of anything. These guys have played with each other for pretty much their entire professional golf careers in most circles. So you put all that together, and really it's a lot of comfortability. And for Jim Furyk, his game's perfect for a kind of course the PGA Tour Champions provides. But I think you're going to get mixed time. Phil, I think he just was desperate, and desperate times called for desperate measures. And he went against his own advice, and he played, and he won. And you know what? Good for him. Did he probably cost somebody else a paycheck? Absolutely. But you know what? In the same vein, Phil Mickelson brought the excitement of the PGA Tour Champions. And did you see the social media on PGA Tour Champions that week? Analytics, it's all the talks in the 21st century. So, especially in PGA Tour Champions, where a lot of these individuals just don't have the social media backings that these PGA Tour professionals do. So, really, the PGA Tour Champions is lucky to have these guys. Hopefully, their success continues and it rubs off on other guys. But honestly, if they're so worried about it being so one-dimensional, just practice harder. I guess that's all it comes down to. Grind on that range, take an extra bucket of balls, and hope that your bucket of balls is better than their bucket of balls. Really, that's all that it is, because the Champions Tour, you have to shoot low every single time, every single round to win. So it's just a survival of the fittest out there in a very fun manner. So it'll have to see how it pairs down. But on a side note, I love that we're talking PGA Tour champions. The fact that we're talking PGA Tour champions on a par 4 on a U.S. Open week really speaks volume to the fact that these names are making a difference this early in their PGA Tour champions' careers.
Well, right. I think that makes your point right there at the end. If these guys weren't playing and if they weren't making headlines in this way, then we would definitely not bring up the Pure Insurance Championship after what was a monumental and perhaps game-changing win for Bryson DeChambeau at Winged Foot. I understand the conflict there, and I also get that feasibly you're not going to limit the players just coming off the PGA Tour, because in a lot of cases they're going to be your biggest stars and your biggest draws. But at the same time, they are playing for real money. They're playing it's a serious competition. It's nothing to laugh at necessarily, even though it might be more relaxed than the PGA Tour. Maybe in a perfect world, you say if you start more than 5 PGA Tour events, you can only play in 1 or 2 PGA Tour Champions events. But I understand that's probably not going to happen. I'm not sure there's any appetite at all for that to happen because, as you mentioned, the opportunity to get in front of more eyeballs. Would we have cared about the Pure Insurance if Jim Furyk didn't win it and moved to 2-0 in his Champions career? No, we would not have. So perhaps that's the final word on that. Let us know what your final word is on Bryson DeChambeau, because we've been talking about him for a solid year now. It feels like ever since he cryptically said at the Shriners Classic that he's going to come back looking like a very different person. He did. Then he had COVID, the shutdown, to even shift that into a higher gear. He did that, finished top 5 at the PGA Championship, won at Detroit, of course, and now he's climbed the mountain. He's won the U.S. Open. In my mind, the most prestigious event for an American-born player. You may feel differently. And if you feel differently, you probably feel that way about the Masters, which, as Zach talked about right at the start of this, we're going to have back-to-back Masters in terms of the major championship sequence. So the fall Masters coming up, we could be seeing Bryson with a 4-foot-long driver trying to bust it out there and drive every green. That's entertaining for me. I don't know about you. So looking forward to that for one of many reasons. I'm looking forward to the low sunlight at Augusta National in mid-November. Zach, thank you very much. Entertaining as always from your part as well. And we'll look for more from you on Pittsburgh Golf Now in the future, on top of your appearance on these Par 4 videos.
Absolutely. And I'll go back to something Bryson DeChambeau said in his press conference. To your point about the U.S. Open, Bryson DeChambeau, from the minute he was interested in golf, he always said that his game was most tailor-made of all majors to win a U.S. Open. And now with another trophy and another medal to match the U.S. Amateur one, I mean, look who's laughing at the top of the hill now. The guy in Colorado who's probably got about a 16-foot driver that's probably hitting at about 500 yards in Colorado right now. So, hey, good for Bryson. All jokes aside, I mean, I'm really happy for the guy. He proved a lot of people wrong. And we'll have to see how this translates as major season rolls on.
It's been fun to talk some golf with you this entire summer, and now the official start of fall today, Tuesday, as this video is posted. But different kind of golf season, so we'll have plenty more for you, both in terms of the local scene and the national scene, right here on Pittsburgh Golf Now.